Hello, and welcome back to the Cup That Cheers. I'm Elizabeth, and today we're doing some more historic cooking. This time it's all about figgy pudding. Now, figgy pudding has become famous primarily because of the Christmas carol, We Wish You a Merry Christmas, which contains the words, "Now bring us some figgy pudding." And a lot of people tend to be confused as to what figgy pudding actually is. A lot of people online in particular think that figgy pudding and plum pudding and Christmas pudding are the same thing. So I did a lot of research beginning a couple years ago, specifically looking up figgy pudding and trying to find out, when did the term come into use? Did people ever make figgy pudding with figs in it? How old is it, and so on and so forth. So the word figs, even though people think, oh, fig just means any dried fruit, why that doesn't make sense, because the word plum is used to mean other kinds of dried fruit. In particular, the word plum is used to mean raisins and currants. One of the things that differentiates figgy pudding from plum pudding is that any recipe that is labeled figgy pudding that I could find actually calls for figs as an ingredient. So fig pudding is a very simple recipe. It basically has figs, dried figs. It has some kind of spice, some kind of sweetener, some kind of thickener, either flour or breadcrumbs or both, sometimes eggs, and that's about it. You mix it all together. There's generally some fat, some suet, or some butter in there as well. Mix it all together, boil it or steam it, and that's your fig pudding. Plum pudding is different. Plum pudding can come in a bunch of different varieties. You can have a plain plum pudding, you can have a rich plum pudding, you can have a Christmas pudding, and those are three different varieties of plum pudding. A plain plum pudding is basically, you have the dried raisins or currants, you have the breadcrumbs or the flour, you have eggs sometimes, you have suet, you have sugar, and then you boil it, and that's it. Christmas pudding is a variation of a rich plum pudding. Rich plum pudding is the basic plum pudding plus more spices, plus other varieties of dried fruit and candied peel added to it, plus alcohol, plus more sugar, and you make it a lot richer, and it's also a lot bigger in volume, and then you boil it, and then you have that. Christmas pudding is basically a rich plum pudding, but more sugar and more spices and more fruit and more alcohol in the pudding, and then you douse it with alcohol after it's been boiled and removed from the pudding cloth, and you set the alcohol on fire when you serve it. So they're similar in that they're boiled puddings with dried fruit in them, but a fig pudding always has figs in it. So that is what I'm going to make today. Now, I started making figgy pudding for my Victorian Christmas caroling choir several years ago, because we sing the song "We Wish You a Merry Christmas" at the end of every gig that we do. So this recipe I'm going to make in honor of the Christmas caroling season in 2020 that was canceled. I'm also doing this as a way to use my brand new pudding mold. Well, brand new to me. I was antique shopping a couple years ago, and I found this pudding mold. And you can tell it's a pudding mold because it has a very tight fitting lid. If I can get the lid off, I will show you. Okay, so it has a very tight fitting lid, and this is what it looks like on the inside. It has a little star in the bottom, has a little ridge to hold the pudding up above the surface of the pot that you boil it in. And so what you would do to use this is you butter the inside and put your pudding mixture inside. And a figgy pudding mixture tends to be kind of dry, more the texture of cookie dough rather than cake batter. And then you would put your cover on top, put the lid on top of that, put that in the water, and let that steam. My friend Shirley, however, gave me another antique pudding mold. She is a theater props mistress, And she bought this antique pudding mold for a prop for a show that she was doing. And then she was already reimbursed for this pudding mold, and she didn't want to keep it, so she gave it to me. So also has a lid with a clip and a handle on the top. And it looks like that inside. It's a lot more fancy. Has a hole up the middle, which is good since this holds larger amounts of pudding mixture. You're going to need to make sure it cooks all the way through the center. So thank you, Shirley. So we're making figgy pudding according to an original Victorian recipe. And this is how it goes. It's called Fig Pudding, and it's from a book called Modern Cookery, published by the Warne and Company Publishing Company. They're the same publishers who handled Beatrix Potter's work. So that's kind of interesting. This copy of this book that I am using is from the 1890s or so. It's missing its original publication page, so I don't know the actual publication date, but through comparing it with other versions of the book that I have seen, I think this is from 1892 or 1890. And so the recipe goes like this. Fig pudding, time to boil 4 hours. Half a pound of breadcrumbs, half a pound of figs, 6 ounces brown sugar, 2 eggs, nutmeg to taste, 1/4 pound of suet, a little milk, 2 ounces of flour. The figs and suet to be chopped very fine and well mixed with the breadcrumbs, flour, sugar, and nutmeg. Then stir all the ingredients well together and add 2 eggs well beaten and a little milk. Press the whole into a buttered mold, tie it over with a thick cloth, and boil it. Serve it with wine sauce or without, as you please. So I have the breadcrumbs. I'm going to go ahead and add the brown sugar. It's sitting out. It's kind of hard and crumbly. Yeah, it's stuck to the... Okay, so that's the sugar. And I'm going to put, instead of suet, I'm going to use frozen butter that I've chopped, and I froze it so that it would have a similar melting point to the suet. What happens with suet is that it melts at a higher temperature. As it's cooking, the suet remains solid until kind of the last minute, and the mixture of pudding ingredients is able to set in place around the suet, the little pieces of suet, in a way that once the suet melts, then it leaves an empty pocket where it was, which makes the texture of the pudding very fluffy and kind of light and spongy rather than dense. Now, because butter does melt at a lower temperature, it's not going to quite do that in the same way that suet does. It's going to be kind of a light, spongy cake rather than, you know, something even lighter than that. Figs, I still need to cut the last 1 or 2. And then you're going to add the figs to the dry ingredients and toss them all together and really coat the figs with the dry ingredients so that they will not sink in the middle of the pudding. Mix it and separate all the figs so that nothing's sticking together and you don't get a big huge blob of figs. Then I'm going to take the nutmeg and I'm going to scrape as much of the nutmeg in here as I can and still hold on to the little last nub of the nutmeg. Alright, now I'm going to add the flour. And actually, the recipe says add the flour, but I think I'm gonna add it after I add the wet ingredients to just adjust the wetness of it. All right, so I'm gonna take my egg, and my other egg, and crack it and beat them up. And then it says you're going to mix it in with a little milk. Now, how much is that? Well, that is however much you need to moisten the entire dry ingredients and to make it all hold together. So I'm going to use about a cup, and this is just regular whole milk. Mix it up. And then pour it all over the dry ingredients. And I have a little bit of extra milk just in case once I add the flour in, just in case that was not enough. It should mix all together. Now, because I have not put the flour in yet, my mixture is going to be a little bit wet. But the recipe says you're going to press it into the mold, so it needs to be dry enough that you can do that. So there goes in my flour. It's about 2 ounces of flour is about a half a cup. All right, so my mixture is made, and now I'm going to get the pudding mold ready. Okay, so we have our pudding mixture mixed, and it's ready to go into the pudding mold. But now we need to prepare the pudding mold. And to do that, we are going to smear it with butter on the inside. So I have some melted butter here. And I'm not going to pour it in, but I am going to paint it in. Need to butter this really well into all of the crevices. If you are going to use softened butter, just get it on your hand and smear it in there. But you want to make sure to butter all the way up the sides. Now I did, even though this is an antique pudding mold, I did clean it very well on the inside. And so it should be fine. You could also, if you don't have a dedicated pudding mold that is fancy and shaped, you could do like I did and previously and you could use just a heat-proof glass bowl. You want to make sure that the bowl that you use has a rim, has a lip on it like this bowl does, or like the heat-proof glass bowls do, because you'll need to make a lid for it and fasten it down to the edges very securely. So now I'm going to pack the mixture into the prepared mold. And I have my water, a big pot of water, heating up. All of the 19th century recipes that I've seen for making boiled puddings specify that the water that you boil or steam the pudding in has to be boiling when you put the pudding mold in to cook. So you need to think ahead and have enough water that will cover, in this case, because this is a metal pudding mold, I'm going to put it in so that it covers the pudding mold about halfway, not all the way up. And there's butter on the outside. How nice. If you are boiling your pudding in a cloth, If you're making an older style boiled pudding in a cloth, you'll need to have enough water in your pan that will completely cover the pudding. It's also a good idea if you're boiling a pudding in a cloth to tie the pudding to like a long handled spoon, tie it to the spoon, and make sure that the spoon or spatula is long enough to reach all the way across from side to side across the lip of your pan, so that when you tie the string with the top of the pudding to the spoon, and then you put the pudding in the pan, you rest the spoon on the top lid of the pan so that the pudding is hanging in the water rather than sitting on the bottom of the pan. Because if it sits on the bottom of the pan, it's going to start burning or scorching. And I'm kind of pressing the spoon into the pudding mix so that it gets into those decorative parts of the pudding mold. And this pudding is probably not going to fill up this mold completely, but it probably would have overflowed the smaller one. All right, it's all in there. It's all pressed in there nice and flat. And this is what it looks like on the inside. So then the next thing is to prepare a lid for the top of this that's going to go, or a cover that's going to go underneath the metal lid. And what I'm going to use is a pudding cloth, because the pudding should rise a little bit when it is cooking. I don't want it to rise so high that it touches the lid, the metal lid of the pot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip this in the hot water that's in there. I'm going to spread some flour on it to make a flour and water sort of paste, and that will also help keep water from getting into the pudding and making it soggy. And then I'm going to put this on top with the lid on top of that. I might tie it down just to make extra sure, and then I'm going to put it into the water. Okay, I have the wet cloth, which is hopefully not so hot that I can't handle it. I'm going to fold it in half. I'm going to spread it all out. Okay, on goes the lid. Try to get it on tightly enough to clamp over the edge. So then I have some kitchen string, just to make sure it stays on. I mean, right now it looks like it is going to stay on, but I just want to make sure. I'm going to tie up and over the lid through the handle. And in a tight knot. Alright, so the water is boiling, but wait till the water is completely boiling, a rolling boil, and then you put the pudding in and you cover the pot and you let it steam. You keep the water at a boil for the amount of time that the recipe says. In this case, it's 4 hours. All right, so it has been 4 whole hours, and as you can tell, the light has changed in here. It is now dark outside because we are in the middle of winter in California. So now it is time to take the pudding out of the water and remove it from the pudding mold and onto a plate. So, wish me luck. Right, a moment of truth. It might have been a little bit overkill to put a buttered and floured cloth on top of the pudding underneath the lid, because it kind of seems like it glued itself down. I will definitely have to clean the flour and water paste off of this pudding mold, but the pudding looks pretty good. It has not risen a whole lot. I'll go ahead and show you. Can't really see that because of the lighting, but you'll see it better when it is out of the mold. So now we put a plate on top and we do a flipperoo. If I can do this without dropping everything, that would be good. Okay. All right, it came right out like you see. So the figgy pudding has finished cooking and has cooled and set in its shape, so it's not going to fall apart. At least I hope it's not going to fall apart when I cut it and when I taste it. So here we go. It smells really good. It smells like brown sugar and figs and butter. Right. All right, so don't know if you can see the slice and the inside, but it's cooked all the way through. It's solid. It looks and smells very buttery. And let me see how this one tastes. The texture is almost spongy. I'm wondering if I could have cooked it for a little bit less time, but it is very good. It is a very mild flavor. I think I could have put more nutmeg in because you can't taste it really at all. I taste the figs, I taste the brown sugar, and I taste the butter. It is a fairly dense texture. It's not cake-like. It's very moist though. But it is quite good. And I love how the shape turned out with the vintage pudding mold. But unlike Christmas pudding, the rich plum pudding, the regular or plain plum pudding, and the fig pudding are not limited to being Christmas treats. So you could have them at any time, seasonable at any time of the year. Whenever you can get the ingredients, that's when you can make fig pudding. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope I've been able to clear up some of the confusion around what is figgy pudding and what is plum pudding and what is Christmas pudding. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. My next video that will be coming out is the next installment of the sewing or stitching sampler series. We have covered the running stitch in the first video, and this next video we will go over some of the variations of the running stitch, and we will go over the back stitch. So tune in then for that video. Please give this video a like. I hope everyone has had a safe and healthy Christmas and winter holiday and New Year. I'm hoping that this next year, 2021, is going to be better than 2020 was. I hope that each one of you has a safe and healthy New Year and that everyone can stay happy.